Okay, time to kick off. So this session is about community, the first part of what we're here. So just to introduce myself, I'm Gareth from the Community Energy Network. That name has been a bit of a misnomer up until fairly recently. So we've been around for about 15 years, but we've been focused almost entirely on healthy housing, energy hardship. Through the Ika Ōtaki Homes program, we've probably insulated about around 130,000 homes over that period through my members, and probably 300,000 to 400,000 homes. That's a worthy result. And I think we've still got 5 contract holders that have been here since the start, which is, I think they're the only contractors that have been there from the start. So significant. About 2 years ago, we decided to expand our focus a bit and actually live up to our name. And probably about a year ago, I think, we started talking with Julie and Anna. And so a great result is being here today, and also getting the database on our website. So I'm not going to take any more time because I think we're already running a bit late. So first talker today is someone we've already met, Julie.
Thanks so much. Hi everyone, sorry again, I know you've got pre-recorded Julie, you've got Julie, now you're getting to speak to Julie. And I promise to be as succinct as possible, but I'm starting this session because for the last 7 years now, I've been studying what does community energy mean in New Zealand. I'm bringing kind of research I've done previously in Canada and other countries, and the Marsden Fund has very generously funded us being here today as a capstone part of researching what is community energy in New Zealand and how does it compare with places like the UK and Denmark and whatnot. But what I'm going to present today at the beginning of this panel, and I'm so delighted to be here with all these different speakers, is what have Anna and I found as we're trying to map and characterize the sector in New Zealand? What does it look like? And one thing that we found is there's some really interesting, unique differences. So I'll just give you an overview of a data set that we pulled together. So kind of like in Chris's presentation, I saw some surprised kind of looks when he talked about how much of a share of the power generation in Canada is owned even partially by First Nations peoples there. So what we were trying to do with this data set is again build this kind of ground up understanding of who owns what, and especially organizations that could be defined under this broad community umbrella. It's now public on the CEN website, so you can search and look for different types of generation or energy efficiency projects or all sorts of different activities. So that's part of the pack that we'll have. That was some slides we were going to talk about before. These are discussion questions for the end, so about the energy transition to have in the back of your mind. So what are the gaps and what are the opportunities and what kinds of policies do we need? So this is our panel right now, and I'm launching it off. So community energy in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So some of the things we've already heard about in the first panel are that community energy, for people who study it like myself, and some of the people on that first panel, is about broad idea of energy democracy. It's about the energy system and the infrastructure for energy not just being something that is done to people, but something that people can participate in as active and empowered citizens. It's not for you, it's also by you. And part of the rationale of why this is important, we heard from a few speakers, is as part of meeting climate change goals, but also, as I indicated in our welcome, meeting goals around treaty obligations, meeting goals around redistributing money for households who are in rental accommodation and don't own their homes, which is an increasing challenge here and in many other countries. How do we ensure that an energy transition to meet climate goals doesn't magnify and intensify cleavages we already have, much like COVID has? And we've really kind of, sorry to make everything about COVID, but you know, it really has highlighted a lot of really important things about the power of the state, about how we're differentially affected, about, you know, different groups like people with small children, and women, and, you know, all sorts of different communities. So energy democracy is about, I mean, some of the slogans people use in public, power to the people. But what does that really mean? Which people, where, who, and how do they participate? But in general, it is about engaging and not just consulting with citizens. not just consumers, because consumers differ based on how much money they have in their pocket, whereas citizens have rights and we have obligations to those citizens. We have obligations of care and connection. That's very different than thinking about someone as a purchasing consumer, right, who's going to take your good. So there's an element about control. How much control do citizens, consumers, groups have in the design of new infrastructure that is built, in the distribution of rents from existing infrastructure? How much decision-making control do they have? A lot of times we don't know this. We don't capture this data as part of general kind of statistics in the energy sector. We count, or we have the data on who's hired and who's fired, and how much money was made, on how many megawatts we generate, but not about this issue of ownership and control. So the literature internationally on energy democracy talks about resisting expansion of fossil fuels, so there's a social movement aspect of it, reclaiming public and community ownership of assets, and restructuring energy systems so that they work for people. So Walker and Divine Right of our first speaker frame, came up with this kind of categorization of community energy that I think will be useful for our discussions later. And that if you want to understand whether a project has a lot of kind of the more radical end of community energy, it's up in that top right corner, where the project is open and participatory rather than closed. Right? It's just about an institution making ideas for other people. It's open. Polls, consultations, forums, all of this can be part of it. But the other axis is about whether the owners of it are distant and private or local and collective. So one of those axes is about decision making, right? And how open. And the other is about ownership. So are the people next to the turbine or the solar array or the EV charging network or whatever, are they the ones making decisions about where it goes and what it looks like? Or are they others? That's me in Denmark earlier this year, pre-COVID. And the reason I took this picture is because I get to wear a cool suit. I'm up north. This is January in Copenhagen. But this is the Middle London offshore wind array, and it was 40 megawatts. And when it was built, it was the largest offshore project. I believe it was in the world. And this project is half owned by the city utility and half owned by a cooperative. And so I really think this is an interesting one to get us thinking about what's possible, because people often assume community means tiny and small. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily, especially in large urban areas where there are millions of people living in a city who have money, who have interests. And the participation aspect had them redesign this from 3 straight lines out in the harbor to kind of this curved array that is now the people who took us out to it. They take people out on stag parties because it's a tourist attraction. And the local owners, I know you get to go out on this Zodiac, bumping around the ocean, which is part of the appeal. But also they bring families out. You can climb up, like we're on one of the turbine platforms there. And kids come out. And again, this goes back to what Hashim Rashid was saying about changing the way that people think about where their stuff comes from, essentially. So that's kind of neat. And the opposite end of community energy, Leigh was interested in studying it, has to do with the opposition to new tech. It's not that we want more new stuff all the time, but when we need to build new things, we need social license to do so. Otherwise, you provoke backlashes, and it is not going to get us to where we need to go quickly. So I promised I wouldn't talk too much, but this is the main thrust of what I want to add to the panel, is what have Anna and I found. We found that the community energy groups in New Zealand, we categorized them into 4 different groups, kind of new grassroots environmental organizations who are trying to tackle climate change and local resilience. Local authorities, which are part of that local public collective. Some definitions of community energy kind of define out the public sector, but in our view that was a mistake. We wanted to capture that local activity from institutional actors. We categorize separately Māori-owned energy organizations because we find that there are different motivations, but also in terms of treaty obligations and so much else around environmental justice is a really distinct and important part, not just here in Aotearoa, but as we saw before in other countries. And another is locally owned consumer trusts and co-ops. And here in New Zealand, the legacy of electricity restructuring has been incredibly important, because we have this legacy of lines trusts right? That have immense resources that you get to vote for the board of. That you, sometimes if you live here in Auckland, for example, you get a share of the profits, essentially. And that is quite distinct from the lines company models in many other countries. So we have defined them in our categorization as part of the community energy sector. But what I'm trying to highlight here is that they're a very distinct part, obviously, right? The resources, the staff sizes, the technical knowledge in, trust-owned vector is very, very different than some of the smaller organizations that we see. So some of the things I typically highlight when I speak to international audiences are like New Zealand's first net zero building, Te Kura Whare, that groups like the Eastern Bays Energy Trust, which exemplifies kind of a lines trust that redirects and recirculates money and a lot of money over time into scholarships for students, into helping people heat their homes, into building new playgrounds and parks and all that kind of local community development stuff that other people were talking about. There's Scott right there down in the middle. So Blueskin is one of our examples of one of these kind of new grassroots environmental organizations. And then energy and efficiency and retrofit. So Sumaria is down there, and I have Aotearoa Energy is one of our examples of, again, this kind of Māori-owned, but a very diverse kind of actor. So in New Zealand, we're seeing huge diversity. And down in the bottom there is Mokai, and so Ōtaki Trust owns part of the generation of a massive geothermal plant. Internationally, this is groundbreaking, right? This is really quite radical. So I guess one of the things we found is that in New Zealand, there's a lot more activity that's part of this community sector than most people would think. Especially when you take this kind of maximalist umbrella of all these different types of community. So we were also interested in looking not just in the different actors, but in also the different activities. So this is by number of projects we found. And in our data set, we have 240 different projects on that public data set, but less than 200, I think about 190 are active, and a number of those are planned. So not all projects that start to get planned become operational because of the barriers we'll talk about later. But the vast majority of projects are in that generation category, and most of them, the dark blue, is consumer-owned former power plants, right? So those are those larger institutional community energy actors. There's a lot of activity in energy efficiency as well. The distribution, you see a lot of the kind of dark blue distribution trusts. Local authorities are really involved in that energy efficiency space, but when it comes to iwi or community development organizations, and iwi, Māori groups in particular, mostly in energy efficiency and generation. So this is directly from the data on the CEN website. So you see here about 70% in our data set are operational. A number are suspended, consented, and planned. So again, this just highlights that there's a lot of activity, but there are barriers, just like any other sector or organization. But I think we really want to be clear about what those barriers are. So some of the policy actors who contacted me who couldn't be here were asking for specifically what are the problems getting these projects from idea stage to operational. What are the barriers? Maybe we can do something about them if we know exactly what they are rather than they know what they are. So in terms of the different kinds of ownership, so who and how, the vast majority, the green segment, about 37% are trusts. Again, that legacy of restructuring in New Zealand where local utilities were broken up. And some of it was kept in community hands. But the degree of participation from trust to trust really differs based on who's on the board, how they see the role of the trust just as essentially a keeper, or whether more active and trying to really get people engaged and involved, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done on understanding the different role of different trusts based on the trustee. So there aren't a ton of cooperatives. In some jurisdictions like Denmark, cooperatives are the legal form that has really done a lot in terms of developing wind power in that country. You heard Ashleen talk about in the UK, cooperatives playing a really big role. They play less of one here. They're not as common. They're very common in agriculture, but not so much in energy. Here, trusts seem to be the more common way that people would set up an organization, and there's some thinking to be done there about whether that's working. And a lot of the projects that we found do so in partnership, either with local authorities, with iwi, or with private sector companies. So another question for people to be thinking about is, are those partnerships working for the people, right? Are those partnerships really enhancing the kind of benefits we'd like to see, and how's that working? This is one of the last slides I have, because I want to move on and let other people talk for a little while, but this is again that kind of breakdown of what are community actors getting up to. Early literature really focused on co-ops and turbines in other countries, right? Building a wind project, 1 or 2 turbines, something like that, or even something like the Middle London project I showed you. Well, here in New Zealand, without any specific policy support, and we'll hear about that later in our panels, we have a huge amount of power generation going on, mostly hydro, but also geothermal and other types of renewable energy. A lot of work in the distribution side of things, moving power between people, so owning the lines. We found, I think when we calculated, including the lines companies, I think it was $11 billion worth of assets in general in the New Zealand community energy sector. Again, you're taking the grassroots energy actors, community energy actors, it would be nothing like that. But including the trusts and the lines companies and all of that in our definition, and particularly those Māori-owned set parts of the geothermal generation side of things, there's a lot of institutional capacity and knowledge and wealth. And energy efficiency is a huge part. And here in New Zealand, that is a big part of the climate challenge, and especially when it comes to warm, dry homes, and also making sure that whatever we generate, we're not wasting. And that's a huge opportunity here. But we're also seeing some really innovative areas around power retail, peer-to-peer trading, and electric vehicles. So a lot of the things that we need to see in New Zealand we have. I'm going to skip this entirely, but anyone who's interested can read it in some of the published papers that Anna and I have. And essentially in a chart like that, we're just trying to understand, based on how we've grouped the community energy actors here, how do we see differences in terms of their motivations? Or do some types of groups engage in particular activities more than others, like more generation versus more distribution? Are some setups more innovative in terms of new areas? So we found that participation and democracy, they're not automatic. You need to plan for them, mobilize for them. They don't just happen. So if we want a participatory and democratic energy sector, we need to work for it. State actors who emphasize individual and prosumer elements are pretty common. Here, when you read about the energy transition, it's more about involving households, right? Or involving consumers rather than citizens and collectives and groups. We found local communities here playing really diverse roles, way beyond power generation, and that the organizational structures around participation and ownership and profit vary hugely. But that's also interesting because a lot of innovation can take place in that diversity. Partnerships have been really key, and the last point, really important, treaty settlements have been an important catalyst, but so much more work and support is needed. But there's incredible work going on at the grassroots level, and that's what we're going to hear about from the rest of the council. Thanks for your patience and your attention today.
We are going to try and do some questions, but we'll do that at the end of the session, see how much time we've got. I was meant to do this before. Can I get all of the CEN members to put your hand up? Just have a quick look around there. These are this is amazing that we've got this many CEN members in the room, and it's a huge thanks to Julie that they're here. So if you want to have a chat with any of these guys over lunch or afternoon tea, to get a sense of where we're at and why we've been doing what we've done. Okay, so we've got 5 speakers to go, and the next one I'm told he's only got 5 minutes to talk, knowing full well he's going to go over that. So it's introducing Scott Willis from Blueskin Energy Limited Network. Down near Dunedin, I'll let him introduce himself. I've seen his slides, so he'll do a good job of that.
Very good, thank you. So, here I go. So, Gareth's introduced me, and I wear a number of hats. General Manager of Blueskin Energy Limited, and I have been invited to sit on the Innovation and Participation Advisory Group IPAG for short, at the Electricity Authority, and I'm a trustee at the Cozy Homes Trust and chair the Energy Committee at the Chamber of Commerce. So there's a number of things that I'm interested in terms of energy. And I'm going to whip through some slides because these came from a presentation I gave last year, but I'm really going to cover off an attempt and a story about democratising our energy system and working from the flat roots. So, we don't need that one. This is where we're based, and down in Blueskin Bay, so in Dunedin, and I'll tell you later about the Blueskin Energy Network, which covers Otago, Southland, but we aim to go national. So back in April 2006, there was big flooding down in our part of the world, and we ran a community workshop around what our community could do faced with the big challenges, because clearly government wasn't pulling up its socks. Government wasn't able to pick up that challenge. We have a climate crisis. We're in a global pandemic at the moment that will last for years, and that pandemic is going to transform the world politically, socially, economically. But it's only a foretaste of the climate crisis we're in, and communities need to organise. Communities need to get going. So we sat down and we thought, what can we do? We've got the climate crisis here, we've got resource peaks, and we've got the economic volatility that will result from poor governance if we don't take some action, if we don't work from the flats roots. That was a flood that cut our community into three really good sense of what we already had and all our vulnerabilities. So we sat down and we workshopped a whole lot of ideas. Pedestrianisation, active transport, food sovereignty, local gardens, getting back our public transport, community wind, and guerrilla gardening. So we have got a whole lot of fruit trees planted on the road verges that occupy and make those streets safer to walk on. And so what we did was work on, there's a great Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment report back in 2006 called, I think 2006, 2007, called Get Smart, Think Small. So we adapted that, we were inspired by that to try and think about what we might do to build an end-of-grid, resilient community, thinking holistically, systems thinking about how to make sure we could build in resilience, and we could do it for our community with a circular use of that energy dollar. So we began working on energy literacy. This is a story of changing the energy culture away from simply passively receiving electrons or passively filling up your car with petrochemicals. It was about building energy literacy in our community. So talking about energy, what happens when you turn on that light switch? Where does that come from? And that's around workshops and community forums, largely volunteer at this stage. And then we began, thanks to ECA, thanks to a big a pilot, this might have been before that, but anyway, working closely with ECA over time on energy demand reduction, so energy efficiency into homes. Because we know that the energy return on energy investment is one of the best things you can do for the energy return is insulate your homes. And not just insulate, but upgrade and add all the other benefits to ensuring a greater standard of thermal efficiency in our homes. So that was our second work area. And the third was looking at generation and building on those other two elements while maintaining them, maintaining energy literacy, energy demand reduction, and working on our own generation and encouraging everyone to become not just passive recipients of energy and electricity, but engaging, becoming prosumers, not consumers, but prosumers, producers and consumers, or engaged in our energy transition. So the point that I'm making here is that we actually need to, we can't talk about this, we've got to get stuck in boots and all and make things. There's a, sometimes there's a statement from one of our leaders in the community down in Ōtaki who said, you know, sometimes it's worth just pouring the concrete and bugger the rest, you know. So it's not the direct quote. So anyway, so we were working on community wind, and I'm going to tell us a bit of a sad story in parts of this. But this was one of our workshops where we had a lot of debate, and this is where this question of social license comes in. And there's a bit of a question here: how much community work can you do to achieve social license if you don't have the appropriate regulatory framework to make stuff happen? You can do years and years and years of work in the community. You can provide rational evidence. You can refute every bit of nonsense, like wind turbines slow the rotation of the Earth. You can do all that and still have people who believe that wind turbines slow the rotation of the Earth, or kill bird blenders. And when they believe things like that, they will vandalise material, they will deliver anonymous leaflets in the community, they will make threats, and they can stop good stuff happening. So you can do all the work in the world, you still need a good regulatory framework. So anyway, this is our local network.
Oh, can you come over here, just because people online are only seeing here.
Okay, okay, over here.
Yeah, just right there is perfect.
I have some notes.
Sorry,
I should refer them at some point. There we go. And I think this is our local network, and you can see that we've got I think it's 110 kV line, and then there are 33 line feeders that come back to the substation. So what we're talking about here is generation embedded within our local network, and generation that is able to service all these feeders. So we're thinking about, we've got a grid, we need to electrify our economy, we need to do so using existing assets, we need to do so intelligently. Let's look at what our asset base already is, and let's make that work. So one of the things that came through our work on local wind was the idea, we got some feedback, and we got a lot of interest in solar. So we started a solar project, and we got a bulk buy of solar to get that into the community, and we got a deal with Solar City at the time. They donated solar for the roof of our office at the time, as long as we sold enough in the community. So we did a couple of deals to make solar happen. Look, I'm talking about Dunedin here. It's not the best place for solar, but it has the highest penetration per capita of anywhere in New Zealand. So that's what the community influence can do. And this is now way out of date. That's a year ago. There is so much more solar in the community, and our school is solar and tied in with our local smart grid. EV ownership. Now we've been working on pushing the idea of transforming our energy and including households and transport as an integrated package, and telling those stories, demystifying the economics of buying an EV, pushing for public transport and active transport as well, but while government moves slowly, we need to act. And as a consequence, you can see, and that's wrong, that's last year. On my street there are 7 EVs, and that's in the last 12 months we've seen another 3 arrive. We're all driving Leigh, it's like autumn in one. And then our wind project that I alluded to earlier, most of you in CEN know this story, but we worked for years and years and years through, from 2009 through to 2017, I think, 2017, when we got a final rejection from an appeal to the initial decision of the reason why community wind was turned down, we sunk through pro bono effort and through massive volunteer commitment over $500,000 into this project. It was turned down on a resource consent on the the risk to the community of having to see wind turbines in the landscape. So that's the power of allowing the Trumpian aspects of our community to have a voice and to damage what could be a good thing. And they can only do that when there is a poor or weak regulatory framework. So we need, so this is a point I'm going to make over and over and over again. Okay. We know that the RMA has to be replaced with probably 3 different acts, one of them being Climate Change Adaptation Act, really important. So that's good. We know that the National Policy Statement for Renewable Electricity Generation is not good enough and it needs to be reformed. But what we actually need is just a really niche piece of kit, of regulatory work, and that's a National Environmental Standard for Community Wind. And as soon as we have a very simple standard, it can be incorporated into any new national policy statement and any reform of the RMA. And it will ensure that we, as a community, can build wind near our substations, in our communities, delivering energy back for our communities and making sure we've got a circular energy model. It makes so much sense, and it's been required by, well, requested by the Interim Climate Change Panel, Climate Change Commission, the Productivity Commission, etc., etc., etc. So I can make that point again and again and again. But that's our aims. So this is what we've been working on. And this is where we got to after the failure to build community wind. We realised we had actually individual investment, household investment of well over 500k of solar in our community, not owned by us, owned by individually. And that solar was really not doing a great deal. So we worked looking for an idea that had been an idea we wanted to use anyway for our wind power, to build in that transactive grid, to build in a smart grid into our community. We worked with John initially, I'm going to talk later on today, and then we came to an agreement with EMH Trade to trial a new smart grid. The EMH Trade brought with them some really smart algorithms which enabled us to do solar share and give a really cool app so that people could see when it was clean green energy. People could see when it was sort of, middling, and people could see when it was dirty, humpy electricity coming down the lines. And they would switch behaviour as a consequence. But to do that, we had to work with our EDBs, the Electricity Distribution Boards, the network owner, and we have to recognise the power of the incumbents in this transition. The incumbents are disrupted by the innovation that's coming from non-traditional forces in the energy sector, and it's a challenge to them. So we know what we can do. We want to see time of use pricing. We want to share with our partners those metrics. So data is really key to making this work, and we can incorporate machine learning really nimbly to make the transition happening. Done. Okay. Okay, here we go. Look at that. That's a nice picture. That's what we want to achieve. And there's testing it, and there's the app, and that's the picture for you.
Totally knew that would happen. I think we've got Sumaria's presentation up. So next up, another CEO member, Sumaria Beaton from Aotearoa. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, ko Sumaria Beaton tokonua, no Awarua, multiple so ruined that, haven't I? So yeah, I'm from Bluff, born and raised, been in a whānau that works very hard and marae based. I have a lot of my whānau been involved in social services and all sorts of things, and I've kind of ended up in the community energy sector, so to speak. So a bit of background about Aotearoa Synergy. So we're marae based. Our shareholders are the Runaka, based in Bluff at the marae. We started 15 years ago. We just had our 15th birthday the other day. And my, yay, 15 years, holy. And my mate, we started it together, Amy Kaio. When we had the launch at the marae, she gave birth, so we've always got that kind of, we know when our birthday is kind of thing. And then a few years later on, she kind of went, oh, I don't think this is me, so her husband swapped. So now it's me and her husband, Jason, who's in the back, that have been building Aotearoa Synergy. So when we first started, so there's our launch there. Tā Tipini O'Regan, he is our upoko. So he was fantastic. So you always pull out the big guns when the political people are not listening, or government, and oh my gosh, they kind of, as soon as he's in the room, it's like they all like bow down and they forget the females in the back that have been like doing all this, but those are the things you have to do, right? So when we had our launch, we first started, we got introduced to the program actually by Niwa, who were doing installation in the north in Waihi, and we kind of thought, it's so cold and Bluff, we need this down here. So when we started, we insulated our kaumātua houses all around Bluff, started with them because that'd be easy. And I remember one of our old fellas, he come this one day at the start, and he said, I've got a complaint. And we were like, oh no, what have we done wrong and everything else. And he said, I'm sick of my wife walking around the house with hardly no clothes. So we were like, oh. So we kind of knew that, okay, we're on the right track, this is going to work. So fast forward a bit, we've grown our Aotearoa Synergy whānau into an amazing team. Our vision is warming and eco-powering our deep south. So our team are pretty committed. Just amazing people. We've got a few sitting in the back that have also made our team work. So as we've gone along, we have started out insulation, we've done a bit of heating, we've also dabbled in solar. It's not as popular, as it is probably a bit further north, but it does work in Southland. And we've looked at hot water solutions, LED lights, and wee bit of wind turbine. So the big driver for us was the insulation. So over 15 years, we've probably put in about $25 million worth of insulation, and that return on the investment is about $130 to $167 million, which is amazing. And that's all due to the reduction in hospital admissions. So the Wellington School of Medicine have done a lot of this research. So, that's a huge driver for me. Like, it makes such a big difference. So, a wee bit about our marae. So, this is where we started out, actually, this wee building. So, here's our beautiful marae Bluff. Beautiful and sunny. So at the marae, we have an early childhood centre, a bilingual centre here. They have about 35 kids. Our marae probably has, where's my numbers? About 25,000 visitors per year, because we have schools, we have government departments, we have national conferences, all sorts, that come and visit. We have a main office down the bottom, and so it's quite a big complex. So overall, we probably use about $35,000 to $40,000 worth of electricity per year. So over our kind of journey, we have helped reduce some of the energy usage. So first off, those old school fan heaters used to heat the marae, so we changed those over with heat pumps. But before we done that, we done the installation, of course, and then we changed over LED lights, and then we looked at solar and wind. So, you know, some of our own whānau didn't even support it. You know, like, we had things being sabotaged, the wind turbine being turned off, we had to like get cameras thinking what the hell's going on. So, and it's still that some of our own don't believe it works and all that kind of thing. It's just like, oh my gosh, you know, it's crazy. But yeah, the other thing I'd probably add to this is just having the local expertise. Like we had to get a guy in from Nelson to help us install the wind turbine, and you know, so those are a couple of the barriers that kind of happen. And then there's also the thinking of, oh, we shouldn't have electricity bills anymore. And it's like, no, we haven't taken it off grid. Like that's another kind of step forward. Yeah, so, you know, Tino Rangatiratanga, like self-determination is kind of like the key driver that our marae has kind of backed us on. So here is Nani Hannah. She passed away in August, so she's been a huge mentor for me and Awarua Synergy. She has backed us, you know, in everything that we've done, and that's probably why the marae has invested in solar and wind and all those other things. So without like a champion, I think, that can kind of back you, it makes it hard to get those projects across the line. So yeah, LED, solar, the garden, we've got a big beautiful garden out the back, and a generator. That was only brought onto the marae because of COVID. And it's like, far out, we need a pandemic to kind of realise that we need these sorts of things to make sure that we're self-sustainability going forward. Batteries and water tanks is probably the next thing that we will look at, unless there's some other technology. So that's just a wee bit of background there. But my big thing, I think, in this whole energy sector is education. Like, it's so important. Over the 15 years I've been doing this, I go and do community talks, education programs all over the show. And last week, there's a group of us and some of our CEM members from the far north. We facilitated a half-day program in Dunedin for 80 to 90 of our whānau order navigators from all over the South Island. And so those navigators worked with 35,000 whānau the year before. And so the feedback we got was, you know, it's a lot of information they didn't know. Yeah. And that's kind of like disturbing, right? Like even if you think of like energy, like, you know, COVID, one of the essentials is a nice warm home and energy and everything. And then if you look at this room, there's not a lot of people that are sitting here from all over New Zealand. Like I still think that there's a lot of education that needs to happen all over the country in order to help all the community projects that are happening. So last week we produced a program, Whole Water Homes, and we come up with our bro, Hemi, to kind of help that thinking. So, you know, like with Māori language, sometimes it's backwards, it's the same with Hemi, it's kind of like work backwards, start with your insulation, work with moisture. Like moisture is such a huge thing. Like people do not realise how much moisture a home produces. Like we just learned last week, brands, there's about 2 tons of moisture that's in a home. Like 2 tons, like what the hell? That's like 20,000 litres. Like imagine tipping like this here. Like just walking into your house and tipping like 2,000 of these of moisture. Like it's crazy. So I think education is so important. So yeah, moisture, and then it's like, if you get these things right, the electricity side of it, like you can start to reduce it and look at solar and other bits, and then your heating is not too hard to do. So that's kind of like my biggest thing that I want to push through. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
I had the privilege of being there last week in Dunedin for that whakaora navigating day, and yeah, it was amazing. It was so cool to see people see the light bulb go on for that big group of people. So yeah, I think that's probably a core thing that is underpinning a lot of what we're talking about today, is that education is so important for that engagement piece, and it's quite hard. You know, healthy housing is probably the simplest part of the energy profile to educate and engage people on, and even that's hard.
Yeah.
So you know, starting to talk about energy and the energy sector, that's a pretty complicated beast. You gonna put Leigh up next?
No, it's
That's us. Okay. All right, Leigh, we're going to put you last, just if you're listening. Next up is Extreme Zero Waste, and I'll kick this off, Dallas, and then so just a bit of context here. I mentioned CEN about 2 years ago. We changed our strategy and decided to get into community energy. Yeah, radical.
We just diversified first.
So what we realised we needed to do is get some expertise fast. So we set up a relationship partnership with Keith, who we'll hear about soon, with Powered Forward. And then we also realised that government weren't necessarily taking a proactive role, and so we needed to be proactive and come up with a project or two that we could showcase and perhaps put up as an exemplar to the sector is what we mean by community energy. And just by pure fluke, there's no correlation here with me being on the board of Extreme Zero Waste. There was an opportunity out at Raglan with Extreme Zero Waste with a discussion that Well Networks had actually kicked off for us to start a conversation with them and John Campbell with Raglan Local Energy. So CEN agreed to make that our pilot, basically, a pilot project that we could hopefully use to show government and funders and others what we mean, and to also set up our own systems to support other communities to grow their projects. So I think we've been talking about this now for about 18 months, 2 years, somewhere around there, and it's not easy. And we're still building relationships and having conversations and just trying to get the broader understanding of who we are and what we're here for. I'll probably now hand over to Dallas, who's the GM, Managing Director now of Extreme Zero Waste Limited, just to explain a little bit about that organisation and Raglan in general. And then maybe I'll just tie up. I do have a presentation, but typical for me, we'll have the conversation first, then I'll rewrite the presentation, and then I'll put it on the website so you guys can see what we're doing.
Kia ora mai tātou katoa, hui ki hautu. Nau mai haere mai tine wānanga, o tine whare, o te wānanga o Auckland, Tamaki Ukaura. Kia ora mai tātou. So Dallas Butler, talking more. I'm originally from the East Cape, but now I find myself on the west side, as my father would say. Not so happy, but doing awesome money over there for another bunch of whānau. So Extreme Zero Waste originates out of a solid waste background. We've been a community organisational enterprise for 20 plus years. Just celebrated our 20th year this year. And as Gareth said, he's on our board, and Extreme Zero Waste in essence is just a vehicle for community engagement. The mandate comes from the community. They hug us, they whip us, they love us, they throw things at us. That's community. So it's all the goods and the bads and everything that goes with it, and it's actually very empowering because they hold us to account, but they also get on the bus when we need them to, and off we go. So at the moment, One of our projects that we're going on into is the social energy, and for us, it's just another vehicle. Okay, so not everyone here has come from a real power-based and energy generation space. For us, it's just another vehicle to do what we do, which is engage with the community, empower the community, and help facilitate or fight that fight for when it comes to the interfaces of local, central, and what we're finding more and more so as we try to scale things, it's in the commercial space. And that difficulty is on both sides. And it will be for quite a few years until we transition into a different model of doing business or project outcomes. So our mission at the moment is to get the community on board. We do pull a little bit from yourself, Scott, all the concrete. Our original mandate came from Fire Eva Rickard, and she told us to get up on that hill and close the landfill. Now we sort of apply the same thing, because along with that, she also said, don't ask for permission. So we don't. We go and do what we got to do, and we'll have to talk about it later, eh? You know, we have to have a couple of countries, you know, that's kind of how community should work. That's how we do work, and there's sometimes that's face to face, and sometimes those communities are national basis, regional, local. We decide as our organisation, we focus in Aotearoa, and we really try and the big driver is the resilience of the community. Now, their resilience comes in many different forms, one of them being power, one of them being the ability to get up and say, yeah, we don't like that, oh, we love that. Actually, you know what, we're cool here, we've all got our kai resilience, we've got a lot of mana kai, so we hit on a lot of different places of what resilience means to us, and it really does start with the ability to stand up and say, we love this, we're not really into that, hey, you look like you need some uppy, heavy come and help. And that's one of the biggest things. So for Xtreme Zero Waste, we're a community hub. We happen to work in the solid waste streams. That's one of our main things, and that comes off primary contracts with our local government. But the locals will tell us that we are their mall. So they'll come to us and where they come and hang out. Some people will come up daily, some people will come up for half an hour, and they'll actually end up talking to all my staff, because it's a real whānau-based thing. And the community know that when they go up there, chances are they're going to run into someone. So like going to your Westfield, wherever it may be, that's what we do. We're your humble country, Westfield. But you're going to get a hell of a lot more smiles when you come to my maybe get a cuddle. Yeah, so as for the community energy generation, the big model behind it, we're really blessed. We've got Gareth, Keith, John, Wayne, Gaz over the back there. There's a bunch of people in this room that we're partnering with that are really trying to make this happen, and we're all acknowledging that it's not an easy path, both from internally, but also how do we take it to market. And that's a learning curve, you know. We're constantly learning at the moment. How do we best interact? How do we best engage? And how do we get those mutual outcomes? And what are they really? You know, what are they? Is it money? Well, you know, yep, money's cool if we're going to pump that back into the community, but for us, on the community side, it's about that resilience again. We're building our own resilience within. So what we consume as consumers or prosume starts right back at the house, you know, or back at the solar farm, the local solar farm. And that's how we can, once those communities become interconnected, we're actually drawing less from the national spaces. We're starting to be a bit more fulfilling for ourselves. What else we got there, Gareth? Yeah, so the size of the farm we're trying to shoot for at the moment is around 4 megawatts. At the moment, we're just starting to go into the feasibility space. Not so much of a challenge getting to there. This initially kicked off with proposals going to the central government as part of the shovel-ready projects, and also PGF. PGF's, our mate there's sort of gone off in a different way now, so we don't know what will happen to that funding. But the feasibility space is kind of the hardest part, but also the easiest part. It requires the least amount of money, but once you get to the other end, your investors are there. You know, but you have to get through that gap first, you know. So it's been a real educational space around that. For me, my background is very commercial, both in iwi-based, both in very isolated spaces, but also in Tamaki Makaurau here as well a number of years ago. And now this is my first foray into social enterprise, which I can say I wholeheartedly love, way better. The rewards are so much better. But so for me, my mahi at the moment is the melding, for want of a better word, of bringing together the commercial and the social sides. So how do I fill my heart, but how do I make sure my puku's full as well? And how do I make sure the next person is as well? And so the bringing together of those two things is a real driver. This one here is an amazing vehicle to use alongside all of our solid waste and our educational spaces as well. Kia ora mai tātou.
That's cool.
Look, thanks very much. And I've sort of got a presentation I'm running through here. So look, I'm chairman of Energise Ōtaki, which is about to become charitable status. We've been operating as an incorporated society since 2010, and predominantly it's a community-led event based with volunteers, and we're focused on taking action on climate change issues, reducing energy costs, particularly for Ōtaki's lower income households experiencing hardship. And we also have a wider vision of creating a town which supplies its own clean energy. And that's not just from solar or wind. It could be recovered resource energy from precious landfill fodder, but that's another story. And we're very keen to support local businesses with access to clean energy, and a previous speaker talked strongly about education, and that's something we're doing very strongly as well. So that's really important, working with the young people, because they are ultimately the future. So we've built a approximately 160 kilowatt solar farm in Ōtaki, and it's divided into two systems, a large one that operates behind the Ōtaki wastewater treatment plant, and I'm not sure if you can see the photos, but it's approximately 120 odd kilowatts at the solar pumping station for the wastewater treatment plant. And it's also separated into a smaller one at the college. So it's been 3 years of planning, and I was very honoured to feature at an ECA event where we actually realised how much we had achieved versus how much we thought we'd struggled. But it has taken 3 years to flip the switch on this, and we're very pleased, and the recognition we've received from the community all the way up to the Minister of Finance has been really exciting. So, you know, there's a lot of passion from our group, and we want to share that with the wider people. So the system is owned by Energise Ōtaki, and we are setting up a charitable company that will distribute the funds we receive from the council behind the meter. Where we've got to is we've got a 10 plus 10 plus 10 year lease with the council, and that was very complicated to get, but we welcome offering advice to other players on how to work through that minefield. And in parallel to that, we secured $407,000 from the Wellington Community Trust as a grant, not a loan. And that equates to basically 600 PV panels producing approximately 160 kilowatts. So we have a different model than a lot, and we talk about being a community-owned solar farm. It's not quite technically that, but the revenue does go back into the community, so you could argue it really is. And we estimate $28,000 from those two sites coming back into the community, and we have no cost on capital, so you know there's not a lot being skimmed off, which is really good, and that's where the community model works. And we're looking at battery storage for both sites as well, and you know, the unique model for the funders is the ongoing return on their social investment, rather than just investing in a building or a community hall, which is a good asset. This one actually generates revenue that goes back into the community. So we've got, with the two sites, we've got the college there set up, which has been generating, and that's quite an interesting model. There's 3 systems on the college producing 30 kilowatts now, and the headmaster, who's a partner and on the committee of Energise Ōtaki talks about scholarships from the sun. And that's quite a unique education model that is very adaptable anywhere. And the revenue generated from those three systems will equate to about $10,000 per annum per year. And that will go into clean energy or environmental scholarships for students. And that's a really good model that that should be adopted by other groups. So that's really gone well, and you've got to have willing partners. So the bigger site is at the wastewater treatment plant, and again, it's behind the meter. And I'll just talk quickly. I've sort of tried to bring in some of the questions. Getting a deal over the line with a council is extremely difficult, but we've done it. So we can talk about the positives that came out of it. It really is about, from a community group point of view, is having a very coherent story. That's probably the key, and a coherent group of individuals. That's probably even more important, because you can't walk into the mayor's office and his CE if you haven't got your story straight amongst your representatives. And we've had a very clear structure from day one: who would be speaking, what we'd be saying, and what we definitely wouldn't be saying. So that's really important for anyone looking at this, and that's been a key part of our success. So moving quickly on to the Community Investment Fund, how it works is we're behind the meter. We generate, whatever, 100 odd kilowatts. That generates power behind the meter for the wastewater treatment plant. And we've set up a very complex meter system with Contact and the council and ourselves, because there's time of day charging as well to put into that mix. And there's been a lot of IP developed around that, and that's something that we can share as well. And that money generated, which is, we're estimating to be about just under $30,000, that is going into a community investment fund, which is owned by the charitable company that's about to be formed before Christmas, hopefully. And that revenue will be distributed according to some very simple criteria, but in general, it's around energy efficiency or energy projects in the town. And we've set up a governance board, and how we've done that is there'll be 2 people from Energise Ōtaki on that, a representative from Ngā Hapu or Ōtaki, and also a representative from KCDC and the principal funder, Wellington Community Trust. So that group will receive the energy efficiency or energy ideas, and will decide on them and disperse that funds into the community for those really good ideas. So further to that program is the strategic goals we've set ourselves, is we want to turn that 30,000 figure into 100,000 by 2023. And we're looking at 5 sites behind the meter. Potential, we've got a few identified, and we're talking with other people now, and things are moving quickly in the space. And I think, ironically, COVID has pushed quite a few things along, so it's actually pretty frantic, let alone having a day job. So, and we've also had really strong interest from our funder around putting some batteries in and things like that. So that's really exciting to be innovating and leading in that area, because that's really the elephant in the room when it comes to generating from the sun. So we see that, and we also see the potential for, it may not be as glamorous as solar panels, but recovering energy from waste is something that's well overdue in this country, and there are technologies that can incorporate that. And for a community, we throw away so much valuable hydrocarbon, we should be moving to that sooner than later. So coming to the pretty picture at the end there with all the big guys, from my end anyway, the key to making these things work, especially in our model, is support from the council, and giving them faith that they're working with a a stable group of individuals, because there's a lot that aren't, and there's a lot with good passion, but they just haven't got their act together, to be honest. And also at the high level of the government, we were very honoured to have the Minister of Finance, on behalf of the Minister of Energy, open our solar farm a month or so ago, and that was hugely positive. PR came out of that for us, and I assume he got a bit too. And also we had the Climate Change Minister attend as well, and he had a sneak preview on a previous visit. So, yeah, look, I think to sum up, I think there's a lot of things going on in this space, and I think having a coherent story and a good group of key speakers at the front end makes these things happen, rather than a lot of hand waving and good ideas in the background. So, yeah, I'd just like to leave you with that thought. So thank you very much.